to 23. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, you have seen that I have talked with you from heaven. You shall not make anything to be with me, gods of silver or gods of gold, you shall not make for yourselves." And the quarterly continues and said that in any culture, the laws reveal the ideals, goals, intent, and character of the lawmaker. The example that was given was the Pharaoh, whose word is the law. So when he ordered that every Hebrew child was to be killed, we know that the rule that was set by the Pharaoh was cruel, asking a segment of the population to be killed. So if we were to use the statement, how does the law in the United States reveal what our goals and intents and the character of our lawmakers? How does our law apply? Any comments?
Well, it's supposed to be administered fairly and for the benefit of the people, so that justice is carried out, so that each and every person has their freedoms are protected, and we live in a just world.
Thank you, Richard. Absolutely. You know, we're endowed with certain inalienable rights, and that's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which includes our freedom to form our beliefs, and that's found in the Declaration of Independence. Additionally, in the 14th Amendment, it says, "No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." And our First Amendment protects the right to free speech, and there is no state-sponsored church. So therefore, we are free to worship according to the dictates of our beliefs. And how about God's law? What does it reveal? According to our lesson, God's law reveals Him that is His goodness, love, values, righteousness, and His restraint. As the law is holy and just, so is God, while creating space for an abundant life. And the law helps us protect us from dangers and calamities. That was expounded on last week, where, there's certain boundaries. As long as we stay within these boundaries, we have the law of liberty. We're protected. But once we step outside, then there could be calamities. We are endangered. In Matthew 22:37 to 39, when the rich young rulers asked, "What is the greatest commandment?" And Christ's answer was, "You shall love the Lord of God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." And the second is, "And you shall love your neighbor as yourself." If we were to keep that law, to love God with all our might, with all our soul, the first four commandments, and then we respect and we love our neighbors like ourselves, which is the next 6 commandments, it'd be so simple. We won't have all of these problems. In Sunday's lesson, we have this called the Code of the Covenant. The question is, last week we are provided, when I say we are the spiritual Israelites today, because we were grafted, and the wild olive has now become part of God's people. So if we were given the 10 Commandments or the Decalogue, what is this, the Code of the Covenants? what is the Code of the Covenants? Okay, the Code of Covenants is described in Exodus 21, 1 to 23, and 19. All these regulations and laws were issued to stop the avalanche of evil and to build an orderly society. The Code of the Covenant is a collection of laws immediately following the Ten Commandments. It contains ritual instructions for proper worships and social, civil, criminal laws covering topics such as the treatment of slaves, capital offenses, and compensations of personal injuries. Again, the question, why it was necessary for the Code of Covenants if it's already contained in the Ten Commandments?
I think it was geared toward the everyday life of the Hebrews at that time. You know, it was a different time, and it was to help them better understand the Ten Commandments in the life that they were leading. And it was just kind of clarifying and trying to make them better understand what the Ten Commandments are by putting in practical terms of what was happening then.
Thank you. And as Mrs. White puts it, says that the obligation of the Decalogue might be more fully understood and enforced, additional precepts were given, illustrating and applying the principles of the Ten Commandments. Let's remember, they were living in a heathen country for 400 some years. So a lot of the teachings that they knew at the early on of their forefathers were forgotten. You know, they became acclimated. They lived in the culture of Egypt. So they need to relearn a lot of the things that their forefathers knew. Let's look at some of these covenants. Let's turn to Exodus 21, 1 to 7. Male, this is about a male Hebrew slave. Can you read it, Richard?
Sure. Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. If he came by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go with him. If his master gave him a wife, and she bore him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. And if the servant shall say plainly, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then the master will bring him to the judgments. He shall also bring to the door or under the doorpost, and the master shall bore his ear through an anole, and he shall serve him forever. And if a man and his daughter to be maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do.
Okay. Thank you. In your version, he calls it judgment. It's the covenants is also called the ordinances or regulations. It's interesting that for the Hebrew male, at the seventh year, he's a free man, and he does not have to pay the master. Also, if he became a slave with a wife, they both were set free. But if he came by himself, and there was a wife that was provided to him while he was a servant, the wife and the children will remain with the master. Good morning, Dennis. How are you, sir? Okay, let's continue reading Exodus 21, but this time let's look at 7 to 11, and let's read about the female Hebrew slave. Let's see if there's any difference. Richard?
If a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as maidservants do. If she pleases not her master who hath betrothed her to himself, then she shall let her be redeemed. To sell her unto a strange nation, he shall have no power, seeing he has dealt deceitfully with her. And if he hath betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. If he take another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall not diminish. And if he does these three things unto her, then she shall go out free without money.
Thank you. Do you see any distinction between the two? Let me just point out a couple of things. For the male Hebrew slave, in the 7th year, assuming he came by himself, he was a free man, no payment. But the woman, there was no redeeming. You know, she has to. She is a servant forever. Okay. But also, though, she was given certain rights and privileges. And that is verse 10 and 11. He says, if he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, her clothing, her conjugal rights. So she has to be kept. But if he does not do these 3 things for her, then she shall go free for nothing without payment. So only if the master fails to provide for the servant, the female servant, then she will be set free. But I think there is a difference between the male slave and the female slave. And the way I look at it, it's this. For the male, for him to be a slave, there has to be, the purpose he became a slave is because there was a debt that he couldn't pay. And this could be because he violated one of the ordinances and there was monetary penalties which he was not able to pay. However, the female, it was entirely different. And the difference is this. Primarily, she was given or she was brought to the master with the intent that she shall be either his wife or a son's wife. So therefore, the payment that the father receives is the dowry rights. You know, you bring your daughter, the husband or the husband's family has to pay for the bride. At least that's pretty much how a rephrase of the contemporary English version. A father should sell his daughter not for debt, but into a household with the explicit purpose that she would be one day marry her master or the son. And these transactions included the price of the bride. Now, on the bottom of the page of Sunday, and I'd like to read it. The slavery laws were special and should not be confused with the vicious and evil practices of modern slavery. Hebrew slaves were in fact protected and valued. In modern and medieval societies, servants and slaves were the property of their owners, who could do whatever they wished with them. In contrast, biblical laws regulated things differently. At least in the male, servitude was limited to 6 years. And in the 7th year, all slaves had to be liberated unless they wanted to stay with their masters. Masters also had to give them Sabbaths off and provide their basic needs. That's entirely different than how we treated the slaves here in the United States. You know, the bottom of the page, it says, though in most of the world, the evil practice of institutionalized slavery has for the most part been abolished. What are the ways in which some of the principles of it still exist, and what can we do in our limited spheres. From what I have read, in all the civilized countries of the world, chattel, ownership of other people, has been abolished. Yes.
Well, we have
It's on. It's already on.
we have to remember that in those times, as compared to now, although we still have it going on in today's society, a lot of slavery came from conquering another nation.
Yeah.
And so as the Hebrews were conquered multiple times over their history, they became the slaves. And even if those people that conquered them became Hebrew, in other words, through the system, they still had their slavery. Slavery was not something that was looked on as illicit. It was looked on as if the people would be gained into their society that way. And although we don't do it now, although it happens in the Islamic world, when you conquer, it was like a belonging. The people were part of the possession. And so when slavery was defined here in Exodus, it was with that in mind that, you know what, this is the way it is. You know, slavery wasn't abolished as sense, but it was highly regulated now.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. But as it exists today, there's still quite a, although it's been abolished in terms of what they call chattel. Chattel is ownership of personal property. There's basically two types of properties. Real property, that's buildings and land. Chattel, that's personal property. That includes your car, your furniture, intangibles, the cattle if you're a farmer, and back in the day, including people. So that portion is abolished. However, you know, we still have, especially from Asian countries, for what I read, there's something like over 29 million that are forced into marriages or forced labor. And remember, one of the commandments is, thou shalt not steal. And when you're forcing me to labor, I'm not getting my wages. What are you doing? You're stealing from me. And the forced marriage is not like the marriage in the the Near East during the biblical times where it was a custom. This is for economic reasons, you know. And that goes on today. I guess a lot of the government, for the most part, is turning a blind eye. But, you know, trafficking is one way. We have, coming from South America, we have the coyotes bringing in people into the United States, basically for labor, okay? So we don't have institutionalized slavery as before, where it's accepted. It just goes on by a different name, under the table, so to speak. Okay, let's continue. Let's look at Exodus 21:18. And at this point, we're going to start looking at personal injuries. Can someone read Exodus 21:18? Richard?
And if men strive together and one smite another with a stone or with his fist, he shall die not, but keepeth his bed. How far do you want me to read?
All the way to, 18 to 19.
If he rise again and walk upon his staff, then he shall smote him, then he shall that smote him be quiet. Only he shall pay for his loss of time, and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed.
Okay.
I guess if you did something to somebody else, you were responsible to take care of them and to pay them.
Okay, which seems to be reasonable, right? What happened to the treble damage? What happened to the punitive damage, which is what would be what we expect today? But this appears to be reasonable. And for the loss, you're basically, if you hurt someone, you're to pay them for their lost wages. You're to heal them, get them healed. And for that, they have to be compensated. Let me read Exodus 21, 22 to 25, continuing with personal injuries. Now, if people struggle with each other and strike a pregnant woman so that she gives birth prematurely, but there is no injury, the guilty person shall certainly be fined, as the woman's husband may demand of him, and he shall pay as the judge decide. But if there is any further injury, then you shall appoint as a penalty life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. I know the eye for the eye is in Wednesday's lesson, but this is a personal injury case. And one thing it mentions about the value of an unborn child, that if a pregnant woman that gives birth prematurely, but there is no, the guilty shall be certainly be fined. You know. Now, a lot of people would say that the unborn child has no rights, but specifically in Exodus, there is a right. Now, it's not talking about abortion. This is not, it's just a premature birth. But what is this principle, life for life? What is it? What it's talking about is a law of proportionate punishment and restitution designed to ensure fairness and prevent excessive retaliation rather than to encourage revenge. This is what we will learn more in Wednesday's lesson, where Christ, in the Sermon on the Mount, speaks about eye for an eye and giving us an explanation what was the original intent.
I think that part of it was supposed to be a just punishment. In other words, not excessive, you know.
Yeah.
Whatever the crime is, it's commensurate, you know. Petty theft is one thing, you know, but grand larceny is another thing, and murder would be another thing.
Yeah.
So it'd be proportionate. But then again, like you say, later on we'll see how Jesus interpreted it.
Right, and which is exactly like that. It's fairness. Okay, in Exodus 22, 16 to 31, there's additional laws. Would somebody read Exodus 22, 16? Exodus 22, 16. You have a volunteer.
Exodus 22:16. And if a man entice...
You have it, Richard? Oh, Pam, 22:16.
And if a man entice a maid that is not betrothed and lie with her, he shall surely endow her to be his wife.
Okay. So there is a payment. So what does this signify? The way I look at it is that a sexual relationship, it's sacred. It's sacred between the husband and the wife. Let's turn to Exodus 22:20. Exodus 22:20. Now, let me read it. He who sacrificed to any god other than to the Lord alone shall be utterly destroyed. You know, in Exodus 22:25, verse 5 says, I am a jealous God. The Lord doesn't want us worshiping idols. We are not to worship any other God other than Him. He is our Creator. If you are an idol worshiper, you will be destroyed. But what is an idol today? Do we carry trinkets, a little Buddha, or
Anything that gets in the way between you and God. You know, you could worship your car or your income or whatever it is. Your first duty is to God. Nothing is to take His place.
yeah, and that's wide open. You could even be worshiping yourself. Imagine, you know, I am so great. Look at me. You know, yes, anything that gets between the way between your relationship with God is an idol. Also, well, Richard, can you read Exodus 22:22?
Ye shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child.
And 23, please.
If thou afflict them in any wise, and they cry at all unto me, I will surely hear their cry.
Okay. You know, again, during the Old Testament, as well as the New, there was always the society provided for the widow. The society provided for the orphans. And that continues on through Christianity. You know, and I look at our community services. You know, I was quite surprised. I remember after COVID, there was I guess one of the manufacturers of infant formula, they had problems. And formulas, you know, was in short supply. I remember having to, you know, go to almost daily basis in the afternoon during my lunchtime, go to Costco or go online and to find out where I could find a certain type of formula for our grandkids, our granddaughter. It's because, you know, at Costco at the time, you only could buy two, and most of the time, we didn't have any. And when I was helping out, those few times that I came to our community services, I volunteered, found out that there were ladies that were asking for formula. You know, I thought we were just delivering food. No, we were also providing diapers, clothing for kids, as well as you know, foods for the infant. You know, so, you know, providing for the need for the needy. If you do to the least of my brethren, you have done it for me. Yes, sir.
One of the things that I was amazed about as we're studying this, because I hadn't really thought about it in that terms, was that you got to remember, this is the book of Exodus. They had just been freed for slavery and now needed laws for themselves as to how to deal with slavery. And they were very, very needy in Egypt, except for they got fed, the things that they missed while they were in the desert. But God had to give them laws of how to take care of each other. It just shows you humanity at its real level. And God is dealing with people and humanity at where they're at and trying to lift them up, not putting this down.
Thank you, thank you. You're absolutely correct. But as you mentioned, they're being freed from slavery. You'd seem to think, and then again, as thinking from a human standpoint, they would remember that. But how quickly we forget. We ourselves are so blessed. What happened is, and I keep hearing, it's not what you did for me yesterday, but what have you done for me right now. As humans, on our own, we're so selfish, we think of ourselves. We forget what the Lord has done for us yesterday and the day before. And He keeps on reminding us that's how a loving God is. He keeps on reminding us of our shortcoming. But He provides a way for us to overcome. And this is one that and I'll read, Exodus 23:25. If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, you are not to act as a creditor to him. You shall not charge him interest. I think that's very insightful. Coming as a banker, if we were to do this, I would have been out of a job. But you know, when we lend to one another, that is a good precept. I should not be lending you with the intent of making money. I'm doing it to help you in your time of need.
I think it also carries, it says that are poor. So I mean, you know, we don't want to take advantage of the poor, but if somebody that's very rich and they borrow money from you for whatever reason, I
Yes.
think you're entitled to get interest.
Yes, this is two different segments of the population. You know, the rich has the wherewithal. The poor does not. In fact, I forgot the text that when you lend him the money and you take his clothing for security, in the evening you give him back because he needs warmth at night. They slept in their clothes. In Exodus 23:1, it says, "You shall not give a false report. Do not join your hand with a wicked person to be a malicious witness." What is that? You don't give false testimony, a ninth commandment. And in 23 verse 4, he says, "If you encounter your enemy's ox or his donkey wandering away, you must return it to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying helpless under his load, you shall not leave it helpless for its owner. You must arrange the load with him." What does Christ say in Matthew 5:14? Love your enemy. Love your enemy. So again, the various laws in the covenant were good. You know, even today, it teaches us how we are to treat one another. And as I read earlier, you know, the two factions of the Ten Commandments is love God and love your neighbor. But this is giving you the specifics. The covenants were specific regulations against putting down or humiliating people. He did not want any kind of exploitation in His mercy. God corrects the sinful tendencies of the human heart and restrains humans' natural inclination. Society was to be kept safe, evil eliminated, and good interpersonal relationship cultivated. Justice and love must rule all actions. The other interesting thing that I found is found in Exodus 23, 10 and 11. This has to do with allowing or letting the land go fallow on the 7th year. Why is that a good thing today or back then to allow the land to go fallow? What was the Lord trying to teach His people? Any comments?
I think it reminds me of the story during when the government was subsidizing pig farming, and he would pay them, not farmers, whatever it was, not to grow certain crops for a period of time. So I knew some farmers. So they would leave the land bare for so many years and then work up the other ones. But when they went back, it was more productive than it would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
And so their production, output of products didn't drop at all.
That's right.
Because they would rest the different sections of the land.
Okay, yeah, certainly. What they learned was, one, not just the people, but the land, the animals also needed rest. And also, it provided provision for the poor, because when they left it fallow, there were growth, there were plants that came out, and this was provided for the poor. Another thing that it's included in here is every 7th year, what were they supposed to do about the debts? They were supposed to forgive. So, you know, you're not going to keep the people down forever. There's, when the debts, they canceled the debts, this prevented the poor, who are indebted generally, even today. The people that can't afford it are in debt. And this prevented perpetual servitude and allowed for some kind of reset. Isn't that what our laws for bankruptcy laws are supposed to reset you? But more often than not now, it's the bankruptcy laws are used for what? To shelter your wealth. It's misused, at least from what I have seen from my 50-plus years of working in the lending industry, that is being abused. As the intent in the Bible for eliminating the debt, as mentioned here, is so that you, the poor, won't be in perpetual servitude. You know, but today, a lot of time, it's the wealthy that's using to shelter their assets, their wealth. Somebody read Exodus 23:12. 23:12.
6 days? 6 days thou shalt do thy work, and on the 7th day thou shalt rest, that thine ox and thy donkey may rest, and the son of thy house handmaid, and the stranger may be refreshed.
Thank you. So embedded in the Code of the Covenants is the 4th commandment. On the 7th day, on the Sabbath, we're supposed to do no work. Let's turn on to Tuesday, God's original plan. God's original plan for the conquest of the Promised Land. In short, what was God's plan for the Israelites? How were they supposed to conquer the land? Were they supposed to be gearing up for battle?
No, they weren't supposed to fight at all. God would take care of everything. And they were just God would go ahead of them so they wouldn't be endangered in fight.
Okay. But that's not what happened. Let me read the Exodus 23:20-25. Behold, I'm going to send an angel before you to guard you along the way and bring to you into the place which I have prepared. Be attentive to him and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious toward him, for he will not pardon your rebellion, since my name is in him. But if you truly obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them. You shall not worship their gods, nor serve them, nor do according to their deeds, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break their memorial stones into pieces. And you shall serve the Lord, your God, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will remove sickness from your midst. What was the motto? Israel was to be a monotheistic nation. God promised them to be their guide. He was to protect and bless them. But they were to be obedient and rely on him. That is not what they did. Further on in the reading, it says, it was not God's intention for the Israelites to fight for their new territory. It was to be given to them. It had been promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and should have been received as God's special gift to Israel. You know, but they were hard-headed. You know, they became, at times, more like the Canaanites than they were Israelites. You know, over and over towards their history, they took on idol worship, especially what the Lord did not want them to do. But yet, the Lord did not forsake Israel, and I still believe today that that the Israelites, as a nation, are gifted. They have a lot of benefits. At least the ones, the Jewish people that I have met, for the most part, are very successful. They're very talented. I'm not saying that they are just favored because they're Israelites, but if we, as the new spiritual Israelites, if we obey the Lord look on us favorably. That's not to say, you know, life is hunky-dory, but he does provide. It just might not be in what you expect, because there's a difference between wants and needs. I remember hearing I think it was Pastor Valdez, so that would have been, 25 years or so ago, in one of his sermons, says that the poorest amongst us would be among the richest of the rest of the world. Sometimes we, as Americans, because we're so blessed, and I mean that, we're blessed, that we forget the difference between want and need. What is necessary to live? You know, do you have to? Why does every house today have 2 or more cars or 2 or more garages? You know, it's not necessary. But because of greed or whatever, our lifestyle, we have become dependent on it. We need to go back to the simpler ways, you know, depend on the Lord, which is what he wanted the Israelites to do, depend on him instead of on ourselves. You know, sometimes I think we have the hoarding mentality. You know, if I have $1,000 in the bank, I need to have 2. And when you gain 2, it continues to grow. The Lord has given us talents, but we are supposed to take care of the needy. You know, when this country first started, the economy of the land was primarily agriculture. What is it today? Maybe 5% of the population, of the employment population is devoted to agriculture. So how do we help the needy today? I don't have a farm. I can't let them glean from my yard. But we need to be able to, how does God, out of our wages, out of our investment income. That's how we provide. We should continue to take care of the needy. You know, we're not under theocracy, and I do appreciate that our government provides a safety net. But I think that we, you know, as in the Old and the New Testament, where the family provided for their elderly. And in fact, I've read if the that goes on to even the grandchildren. So if the grandchildren's parents are gone, but they're survived by the grandparents, the grandkids should be helping out. Unfortunately, what do we do today? Oftentimes, we forget the elderly. And last week, if you were here, we've had the elder abused. And, you know, we're forgetting the commandment to honor your father and your mother. And it goes on to the elderly.
I think the point we sometimes forget, you know, everything we have is not ours, it belongs to God. And so when we say, I've accumulated a lot of money, I've accumulated a lot of God's money. You know, I have certain assets, but God provided them. I didn't provide them. God provided them. He gave me direction, or you direct, whatever it is. So if we keep that in mind, that, you know, we should give proportionate to what we have.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, but the Lord does not force you to do that, that you should do that on your own volition. Let's move on to...
Roger,
yes,
just
sir.
one thing real quick.
Go ahead.
As a matter of fact, I think it's covered in one of the future days. But you just rang my bell, because somewhere in this, I think it's on Wednesday, let me look, that, oh yes, the original intention of the law was formulated against any personal revenge. Jesus Christ, who gave these social laws to Moses, knew the purpose of this law. Therefore, he could apply it in an objective way according to its original to its original motives and intentions. And his motives were just that. If people had the idea of becoming Solomons, that was not God's intent. God gave him wisdom so he would know better than to hoard money and hoard wives and ignore the law. He gave these rules in a manner to create a society that could better reflect God's character.
Thank you. You know, when you look at the Sermon of the Mount and how Christ expounded on how we, as followers of Christ, what is the proper way to live righteously. You know, in Matthew 5-7, you know, Christ cited texts from the Old Testament that people were surely familiar with. However, he was speaking against the current rabbinical interpretation, which over the centuries had moved away from the original meaning. And we're talking about the eye for an eye. Can you read, Richard? Matthew 5:38, and then Matthew 5:43-46. So Matthew 5:38, and then 43-46.
Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. Ye have heard that it hath been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you, that ye may be children of your Father which is in heaven, for he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love them which love you, that reward you have, not even the publicans do the same.
Thank you. As I studied earlier, it was never intent to take the law into your hand. there were judges. And as we saw at how it was applied, it was supposed to be applied fairly. However, throughout the years, it came that, eye for an eye. You're talking now about revenge. And in fact, going back to Exodus, that if the master were to have injured the eye of the slave could go free. The slave did not turn around and took revenge on the master. No, it was to be fair. We're now run out of time. Are there any other questions or discussion?
I like one statement of
Okay.
the lesson that says, talking about Jesus, the motive behind it was to bring justice, reconciliation, and restore peace. And so I think that applies in life today. If we love our enemies, what are we doing? We're reconciliation,
That's correct.
Restoring peace. And you can fight your enemy. You're not going to have any reconciliation. You're not going to have any peace.
So it's reconciliation and not revenge.
Right.
But today, more often than not, I want my treble damage and my punitive damage. That was never the intent. Okay, I hear the bell. Richard, could you have the closing prayer, please?
Heavenly Father, as we've studied the Word this morning and we studied the embellishments and the increases and interpretation of the original Ten Commandments, we see it wasn't a change in the Ten Commandments. It was just making it more clear to the people at that time, and a lesson for us that God doesn't change. The lessons are still, the Ten Commandments are still valid, and that He'll work with us and make sure that we follow His will. Now we ask you to be with us now and pray for the upcoming service the pastor will lead out in. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
I want to add one comment
Okay.
now after the prayer. Remember the book of law that the Jews had at the time of Jesus had over 28,000 pages. They had expanded on the book of Exodus to such a degree. And we have a tendency sometimes, maybe now, to do the same thing. But the obvious thing is like what Richard just said, the restoration of peace.
Okay. Thank you. And for those in the sanctuary and those that are online, our worship hour will start at 11:15. We'll see you then. Thank you. You're correct. Well, what did they call that? The Mishnah? Or what was it that they had the...
No, it starts with a T.
Reminds me of like
But I
like
remember.
the legislature today, when they put a bill, it's 1,000, 2,000, and nobody reads it. No, there's a single congressman.
They vote for it, don't we?
They vote it, and then you stick in little things. So I always